There are two scripture readings this morning, one from each testament, the first from Genesis chapter 37, the first 11 verses. Jacob settled into the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to them, to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And from the New Testament, two short readings out of the second chapter of the book of Acts, the coming of the Holy Spirit. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. "Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks.
Thank you, God. We always come in on Sunday mornings, and I say at some point at the beginning, "The peace of Christ be with you," and you always respond, of course, as you do. It's a ritual and also with you. You know, and sometimes we do communion. We've got communion up here sometimes, and other times there are times when I'll just say, "The Lord be with you," and you always sort of, as a ritual almost, say, "and also with you." I heard about this one minister who came in, and he was going to do all that, you know, "The peace of Christ be with you," and so on. They were all primed to say, "and also with you." But his mic wasn't working. And so, you know, he sort of figured that out, and he said something like, "There's something wrong with this microphone." And everyone sort of responded, "and also with you." You know, life is interesting. Life can be challenging. It can be an adventure sometimes. And honestly, I think most of us don't want it to be that interesting. We don't want it to be too much of an adventure, too challenging. I still remember hearing about this one woman who read her horoscope. I never read a horoscope or look at it, but she read her horoscope one morning, and it said, "You will soon be having a little adventure involving water." And she thought, oh, great, maybe my husband's going to come home and he's going to say we're going to go on a cruise or a day at the beach or something like that. A little adventure involving water. Later that day, she dropped her false teeth into the toilet. And, she did have a little adventure involving water. What's that old, there's this old saying, I think it comes maybe from Native American tradition, but something, and it's not a blessing really, may you live in interesting times. At first you think, oh, interesting times, that's powerful, that's wonderful, but, interesting times may be troubled times or bad times in some way. It may be tragic times. I'm not sure we want our lives to be all that interesting, really, sometimes, or all that much of an adventure. And yet to have that sense of risk and a dream and an idea and an adventure almost, something daring, I think that can take hold of our lives. I still remember what someone told me years ago. He said, people will respond. Now, not everybody, of course. Some of us truly do. We hold on to the safe and comfortable. We want things to remain just exactly the way they are. And yet, I still remember what he said. He said, people will respond, to that person who really tries to touch our deepest desires and unleash our wildest dreams, who calls us, who asks of us, who inspires us, who calls us to life above and beyond. Now, I wonder if many of us, maybe not everybody, but many of us don't come in here almost hoping or expecting that the preacher will ask something great of us, will ask us to live somehow beyond where we're living now, to aim higher and dig deeper and dream bigger in our Christian lives and just in our lives. I still remember this one young woman who, a number of years ago, she came out the door as I was greeting at the door, Brenda and I, and she said, keep challenging us. I guess it was a challenging message, she thought that day. Keep challenging us. Keep challenging us. I was in the bookstore the other day, and there was a book that I suddenly became interested in. It's a book that it's still on. I saw yesterday, at least nationally, still on the bestseller list. It's been on the bestseller list for a few weeks or maybe even months, and I can't remember the title or the author, his name. I think he does kind of a blog, and he's got maybe 2 or 3 million followers, and so now he's written a book. I don't really remember the exact title of the book. I could probably come up with it, but I'm not going to, because what I do remember is there's a bad word in the title. Now, they kind of X out 2 or 3 of the letters, 2 of the letters in the word, but you can still kind of tell what it is. I mean, I can't tell because I'm a minister, I'm holy, but probably everyone else can kind of tell what the word is supposed to be. And so, and as I kind of looked at the book before, I sort of read a little bit about it, because at first I thought, oh, it's probably a terrible book. But, I think, now maybe it is a terrible book, but I think it's about resilience and hope and drive and following your dream and focus. But, I couldn't very well buy the book, because I'd go up to the cash register and there'd be a teenager or someone there saying, "Hi, Reverend Thompson, how are you? I've admired you your whole life, and now what are you reading?" And I couldn't turn it in. The cost of a book with a bad word in the title as part of my reimbursement account. So what I did was I kind of snuck over and made sure that no one was watching, and then I picked up a copy of the book. And what captivated me, and I don't know if the whole book is interesting or good, but what captivated me, honestly, was the very first story. It just sort of gripped me the way I try to grip you with sort of an opening. But it's about a man who, by midlife and beyond, had really done nothing with his life. He had not really achieved anything. He is, I think I would say, a sort of a classic total underachiever. And there had been some addiction in his life. At the age of 50, he found himself in really kind of a low-level type of job, a low-level position. But over the years, he'd done some writing. He had written some poetry and he'd written some short stories, and a publisher got a hold of some of his writing and approached him and said, I think I could publish a novel of yours. I like this. do you have a novel? He didn't have a novel. So he said, well, if you could commit to a novel, I think I could publish it. But you may have to give up your job. You may have to really focus because I'll need it pretty quickly or, time will pass by. And so, he's thinking about this. And he saw this as really a very critical point in his life, maybe a point that would never come again. And he said this later. He said about that time, I have one of two choices. Stay where I am and go crazy, or stay out here and play at writing, work on my novel and starve. And he said, I have decided to starve. So he quit his job. He began writing. You can hardly believe it. In 3 weeks, he had written his novel. It was published. He wrote 5 more novels and some other things after that. I think altogether the 6 novels sold 2 million copies. So it's not Shakespeare. It's not Harry Potter. It's not The Girl on the Train. It's not it's nothing like that. But it's a pretty good living for someone who was really not doing anything with his life before. His name, and maybe you've heard of him, I had never heard of him before I read it in that book with the bad word in the title. This man's name is Charles Bukowski. I've never heard of him before. I've never read anything by him. What I sort of Googled and saw about him, it may be a little gritty for me, so I can't really recommend it as writing that you should read, although they're sort of thinking about some movies for some of his stuff and that sort of thing. So it's really gone well beyond what he originally did. But what I can recommend is his story, his personal story of having a dream, of having someone sort of call upon that dream and having that dream called forth and realized. Later in his life, he was interviewed, and in the interview he said, we are to live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if I'm living that way or you are, or tell you exactly what to do, but it sounds pretty great, doesn't it? It's kind of a goal, kind of a dream for us in some ways to have. Joseph, in our reading today, what David read to us a few moments ago, Joseph has a dream. There's a dream that's being called forth, that is being called forth to be realized. And I think when we think of Joseph, we think of his dream, having a dream. But, the very first thing, when you first begin to read this story, and we're going to be on Joseph now for my remaining time here. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at this story, my favorite story of Joseph. But when you see these first couple of verses, it seems to me that all you can really think of and all you can really see is how dysfunctional this family is. Now, I know any psychologist would tell you that every family is dysfunctional to some extent. Everyone but yours, of course, and mine, but everyone else's is dysfunctional. But, the favoritism he shows here and how insensitive he is in the favoritism that he shows. To send his youngest son out, immature, arrogant, self-centered, to send him out to sort of spy on his brothers and bring back a report, and he brings back a bad report. I mean, do you suppose he ever brought back a good report? Don't you think it was always a bad report that this immature younger brother brought back? So, that sets them up. And then he gives Joseph, this robe or this coat. Now, through the years, we've all sort of understood this to be a robe or a coat of many colors. We know that Broadway musical, Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But more recently, scholars have identified those words that we always thought was coat of many colors, and they're now saying that may be right, but that may not be quite right. It may be more. Those words, we're not sure, but those words may mean a robe with long sleeves, or a long robe with sleeves, because that showed back then royalty and richness. So here is Jacob, maybe setting up Joseph as royalty almost compared to his brothers. No wonder they hated him and wanted to murder him. And then Joseph has this dream. I mean, you don't need to be a dream teller to be able to tell what that dream means, that these brothers and the whole family are going to bow down to him one day. And that, of course, just sets up greater distance between Joseph and his brothers. And, here's this immature, self-centered, arrogant young man, and this dream's going to be realized, but he doesn't know, and they don't know, only God knows, that it's only going to be realized when Joseph is humble and mature and selfless. But always for Joseph, always from now on, there is this dream that God has planted in his heart. It drives him, it pushes him, it lets him know that God is with him. We'll see this absolutely clearly next week in what we read. I mean, what do you do when God keeps you up at night with dreams and visions for what your life might be and how it might be transformed? Well, President Woodrow Wilson once said, "We grow great by our dreams." All big individuals are dreamers. They see things in the soft haze of a spring day or in the red fire on a long winter's night. Some of us let these great dreams die, but others nourish and protect them. Nourish them through bad days until they bring them to the sunshine and light which comes always to those who sincerely hope and believe that their dreams will come true. Let me tell you about a little girl who was born into a very poor family in a shack in the backwoods of Tennessee. This is unbelievable in our day, I think, but she was the 20th of 22 children. She was born prematurely, she was frail, they really didn't think when she was first born that she was going to live. When she was 4 years old, she developed double pneumonia and scarlet fever, and this left her with a sort of a paralyzed and useless left leg. She had to wear an iron leg brace. And yet her mother was one who encouraged her. She told her, if you set your mind on it, you can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do. And so with that kind of encouragement in her mind, at the age of 9, just at the precious age of 9, against doctor's orders, she took off her leg brace and took her first, I would say, rather feeble step. It took 4 years. But finally, she began to walk almost normally. Then she got this crazy notion that she wanted to be a runner. She wanted to be the world's fastest woman runner. So she started to run, and at 13, she entered a race. She came in last, dead last, way last. She came in last in every race that she entered in high school. Everyone but her mother told her to quit. But finally, the day came when she didn't come in last. She came in next to last. But finally, the day came when she won. And after that, Wilma Rudolph won every race she ever entered. In 1960, she went to the Olympics and won 3 gold medals. One of her gold medals was on the relay team, and either she dropped the baton or it was dropped in the handoff. And so she had to go back and get it. All the other runners now were ahead of her. Unbelievably, she caught up to the other runners and she outpaced them and won. Wilma Rudolph was once asked by a reporter what helped her to overcome her early illness and all of the obstacles she faced. There were others. And she said, "Well, many people told me I'd never walk again. My mother told me I would. I believed my mother." The way maybe we need to believe God sometimes when He speaks to us or asks of us or calls to us in certain ways. A few years ago, I read a book about the presidential campaign, the short presidential campaign of Robert Kennedy back in 1968. And I mean this completely as a non-political statement at all, but I kind of always been fascinated by Robert Kennedy. And you know that presidential campaign ended with his assassination on, I believe, I didn't go look this up, but on June 4th. And then he died a couple of days later on, I think, June 6th. But whether you agreed with him or not, whether you liked him or not, I think he really did put out kind of a bold vision for what our nation might be. And he put out kind of I would say, a bold vision for us as individuals, what we might be. And he would often quote George Bernard Shaw. And that quote is, some people see things as they are and say, why? I see things as they might be and ask, why not? He also quoted Camus, who I studied in school. He was, as you probably know, an existentialist writer, French, and a novelist. And Camus said at one point, perhaps we cannot prevent this world from being one in which children are suffering, but we can reduce the number of suffering children. And if people like you don't help us, who in the world will help us do this? There was just a call that he had. He used words often from other people, but there was a call he had to climb to a higher level, to live at just a little higher level. And so let me ask you, is there anything that you were supposed to be doing with your life that you just really have thought was impossible? Is there any place where you have been called on to serve or to help, but so far you've let someone else do it? Or maybe it's not being done. It's important work, but no one's doing it. Is there any part of your life that you've been asked to give, but so far you're holding back? You're comfortable where you are. You're afraid. I am convinced that there is in each one of us one great thing, maybe for many of us, one more great thing that we might do. Or maybe that great thing is what you might do together. Hope is calling. The Spirit is calling. God is calling. There is a dream in you that is calling. Someone told me a long time ago, the quote that I remember is something like, do it trembling if you must, but do it.